Hello, Security Weekly, and welcome to a Purple Team case study that we call Project Motorhead. I am Bryson Bort. I am the founder and CEO of Scythe.
And I am Jorge Orchilles. I am the Chief Technology Officer of Scythe. Happy to be here and looking forward to sharing a real-life case study with all of you.
So I'm not a fan of agendas because you pretty much know what we're going to do. We're going to walk through an in-depth example of a Purple Team. And why I was really excited about this is for a long time, there's lots of discussions about process of Purple Teaming, and very few folks actually get the opportunity to share the explicit operational details of a case study and a test. And so we're going to walk through all the way from figuring the intelligence of the adversaries, how we put the threat intelligence together, and then exactly what happened with this client. And up front, we'd like to thank Urban Johnson and the entire National Motor Freight and Transport Association, NMFTA, takes a while to memorize that, for allowing us to share all this information. That's a big credit to really open up the kimono and let everybody else see that.
Yep, and just real quick on this slide, we have written and published a free framework for all of you to use. It's called the Purple Team Exercise Framework. So if any of you want it, it is free. You can download it there. And it's many years of experience doing this and, just overall how we got here and what we're going to do. If you want to do it yourself, that's the whole goal of us sharing this.
Yeah, so one of the things we like to do for all of our presentations is you will notice all of them everywhere there's a source or where there's a reference for more information. We provide the link and the authors for that. Follow them, follow up on it so you can deep dive because, of course, we're always time limited with what we can share. So what did we do? It was 6 weeks of actual exercises, but with several weeks of planning. So overall, about a 2 to 3 month exercise with what's called an assumed breach scenario. So Urban in particular felt comfortable with the surface area of his organization and didn't want to waste time and effort on the access part of the attack chain. As a result, we assumed we were already in, and the Purple Team brought together the threat intelligence, the Red Team, which actually operationalizes the adversary technical operations, the Blue Team there all the way from SOC, Hunt Team, Forensics, and all of those components, looking to see what can they detect, when can they detect it, when should they have detected it, refining those in to look at protection, detection, and response. We were hired to run all of the roles, so it was an interesting 360 perspective with us running all of that Purple Team in coordination with NMFTA for logistics. And then the final part, which I think is really neat, is one of our goals was we don't want to spend any more money on technology. We're going to improve and refine what's already there. And I think this matters for most organizations. I have never seen a place that really needed something else so much as what they had was not optimized for the defense. So in summary, an increasing number of complicated adversaries from a baseline to benchmark against, then Chinese, Russians, and Iranian threats, and then all the way to the Red Team favorite, of course, which is the free play. In this instance, since we are in a Purple Team and our own philosophy of being very mission focused, the free play wasn't a pure, Red Team free play of let's see what ridiculous things we can do, but really looking at what we had learned in the prior 5 weeks and trying to dial into gaps that we thought were in the surface area of their ability to respond to the attack chain. So threat detection is hard. This is why having products is so difficult. One, products are not the only part of your surface and risk area. This is an area. This is something I think we miss all too often in this industry. Is we're really good at finding nerd solutions to nerd problems, and the reality is, as a business, is that combination of the tools, the processes, and of course the people, and how people perform in that. And there's two elements of that. There's employees who are part of your surface risk area, and then there's the IT and security staff and their ability to use their processes and tools to be able to respond to what's happening in that environment. And so the areas that make this difficult, and I have a reference here to, I actually should have put his name on here, but this is Anton, I'm gonna mess up his last name, Chuvakin, is that right? Close enough. Yeah, he used to be Gartner. He's now at Google. He is one of the brilliant thinkers in the space, and he has a blog that goes in more detail. But in short, the reasons that detection are so hard, the reasons that emulating an adversary and really doing this in an effective way is one, of course, the uncertainty of the detection. We've seen the pyramid of pain where it's easy to do signatures, and then it gets hard once we're looking at how many different ways there are for attackers to execute particular TTPs, and that's the uncertainty of it. Improving the detection with the alerting. So there is a chain of what do I see and being able to dial in positives from falses and what's a baseline of that environment. And then the other thing, which I think is something that I haven't seen any other tools really do, is the multi-stage detection. The reality is that attackers don't just appear and suddenly have all of the code to accomplish all the things that they need to do. It goes in stages. And going back to the uncertainty is it can also change. So not only do we see things like polymorphic malware for defensive purposes, but based on what they might see and how they might change their goals as they're going through an organization, attackers bring down different pieces of code to accomplish different goals. And then I put all this in the context of one of my other favorite thinkers in this space, Sunil Yu, created this idea that he released at RSA 3 years ago called the Cyber Defense Matrix, where we're looking at our organization across devices, applications, networks, data, and users across the phases of identification, which is configuration management, knowing what I have. And then when we get into the attack phases, it's protection, my ability to keep an attacker out of that. Detection, my ability to spot and identify that. Respond, then after I've detected it, figured out what it is, respond to it. And then, of course, recover, which is bring us back to ground zero before the attacker moved into our environment. So being a former Army officer, I think everything should be very simple because that's as much as I can get. So 2 colors, 3 phases, 2 simple concepts. I break down the attack chain into 3 high-level categories. Recon, casing the joint, looking for what houses would be interesting to rob. Access, my ability to lockpick or break into a particular house. And then we draw that blue line because access is the component of I gained access, I'm there, I have shell, but I haven't done anything yet. And while a business might be uncomfortable with that, from a business impact hasn't happened yet. Impact is that immediate next step or whatever that time frame is to that next step. And that's the post-access environment. And so in an assumed breach scenario, we start inside across the blue line. We're now looking at post-access actions, establishing contextual business risk of what matters to that business and what is the attacker able to do to pivot and work their way to that. And you'll notice that business value, AKA what establishes that most risk, of course, is the highest when I'm actually interacting specifically with business assets versus trying to understand as I move left of boom.
So from a baseline perspective, and again, executive summary, just to get you all have an idea what we're going to walk through. We did about 65 unique adversary behaviors, those tactics, techniques, and procedures we're going to dive into. Of those, 3 of them were detected. These were around scheduled tasks, which was great, and we'll dive into that a little. 1 test case was blocked. This was DNS, command and control. But 94% of the unique TTPs we did were not logged, not detected, and not alerted, meaning that all of the adversaries we emulated would have been successful and achieved their objective without being detected in this assumed breach scenario. When we completed our test and our purple team engagement after the 6 weeks, we did not spend any money on technology. We spent time and resources enabling telemetry, in particular Sysmon, which we'll talk about here, and creating logic and rules within their SIM environment, which is a product called Event Sentry. They worked with us throughout this engagement, and we're also going to be giving out all those rules in blog posts coming up shortly. But as you can see, we got to 64% detection with these rules, with this tuning, and by enabling the current tools that were already there. Meaning that for any of the attackers that were emulated, somewhere along their chain, they would have been detected, there would have been alert, and there would have been a response by Urban and his team to actually mitigate the attack. So that's what we're going to talk about here for about the next 30 minutes. We're going to dive deeper into each of these TTPs and the overall process for how we did it. So we hope you enjoy it and can implement it. So from the highest level, the goals and objectives here were to emulate real adversaries that had the opportunity, intent, and capability to attack an MFTA. We consumed that cyber threat intelligence. We created adversary emulation plans. We emulated those against the production environment where all the security controls are. We then tuned those controls. We enabled the telemetry for local detection first, then send those logs and the right logs to the right place, enabled logic, enabled rules, tuned them, tested, realized that some things were in the environment that were legit, even though they emulated some of these adversary behaviors. So we had to do more and more tuning, more and more testing. And at the end, of course, zero increase in technology, $0. So
production environment is critical for three reasons. One, you're getting that mix of people, right? We talked about employees and you're actually seeing realistic response. Two, what is employed for defense in the environment is realistic. And that sounds like an odd statement, except for I can't tell you how many times I've seen folks be like, hey, look, we have this EDR, we have this, thing in the lab and it catches and stops everything. Well, it also catches and stops all legitimate work too, which is why what is actually employed is so critical. And then the third part is I have not seen an engagement yet where the client didn't learn something about themselves, not from the defensive perspective, but just like, oh, we didn't know we used that. And so you learn, you kind of get free configuration management from the adversarial perspective by doing this, and you only get that from the production environment.
That's right. And how did we start? The first thing was cyber threat intelligence. A lot of people think purple team, oh, that's the red and the blue team, and that's it. No, we want to start with cyber threat intelligence and involve them in every step because it is a cycle. So first things we had to do was understand the target organization, understand adversaries that had the capability, intent, and opportunity to attack them, adversaries that have attacked other organizations in their industry. Then gather threat intelligence, extract the particular behaviors, analyze and organize those into a plan, and then actually create an adversary emulation plan. These plans have all been shared, so we will give you some resources for that at the end. And then, of course, emulate the particular adversary. From a high level, how does the purple team work? Well, each week we had a new adversary. So we would present that adversary. We would all meet early in the week, go through the particular adversary, understand what they did, who they've targeted, how they work, what those behaviors are. Then a tabletop discussion. Where do you think that this adversary would get caught in your environment? What are your expectations? Then we would emulate the various TTPs. The blue team would then look and see if there were logs, right? And here we're just talking about us two, but there was a number of people involved in this. It wasn't just two of us, but there are a number of people involved from the organization as they spectated, but as well as some detection engineers. And then we would analyze, did we have local logs? Did those logs get sent where they needed to get sent? Are there rules in place? And sharing the screen throughout all of this. That way, the blue team learned from red team learned from blue, and our customer learned from everyone. And then, of course, document the results. Throughout the week, we would spend time tuning and adjusting and repeating those TTPs. And we'll go through sometimes, for example, in PowerShell and detecting PowerShell, a perfect example to Bryson's point is they didn't think that they used PowerShell. And we ended up having to run that particular emulation like 10 times just to get the tuning right so that it would only alert on malicious PowerShell. So what are TTPs? Those are the adversary behaviors. You've all seen David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain, mostly for blue teams. But what we want to focus here is on the top stage, right? We don't want to focus on catching the particular tool. In this instance, we'll tell you all the tools we use. We use some open source tools as well as our enterprise tool. But the focus was in emulating the behaviors of the adversary, not using exactly the same tools or the same domain names or the same IPs, etc., because those change, and those change quite easily. The behaviors, those don't change that often. And we obviously mapped to MITRE ATT&CK, the known list of 525 techniques. I know this because I counted them the other day, that are available to emulate or are actively used by adversaries. Now, Bryson spoke about this already, gave a shout out to Anton, but really, why is detection hard is very, very important to understand. Every time we go to a new environment, those environments are all different. They're generally more and more complex, right? They were built years ago and just grown and grown. If you've done merger and acquisition, you know how messy that gets once you start bringing in other data points, other systems, etc. And at the end of the day, none of this is solely about technology. Detection needs people, and people don't scale. Detection also needs data, and you have all of these data sources. And if you have too much data and you can't go through all that, then you just have noise. So context is extremely important. And really the triaging, the separating of those logs, putting them together in an attack chain and saying, this looks bad. And of course, all this is made harder with attackers not wanting to be detected. Ransomware obviously is a poor example, because ransomware does want to get detected at the end, right? They show you that screen, but that happens all the way at the end. We want to focus on detection earlier on. And detection is not only activity, as you'll see in back to the Powershell example. Detection is all about intent. So big shout out again to Anton. Excellent blog post, right? This slide is derived from there. And I think he just did a follow-up post. So definitely follow him and keep sharing information with everyone. So roles and responsibilities, and again, this is all based on the Purple Team exercise framework that we've given out to the community for free. There's various different roles. Larger organizations are going to have more roles. Smaller organizations are going to have smaller roles. But in this case, we played the role of cyber threat intel, red team, and blue team. We brought various people on to do all that. I led the exercise as far as exercise coordinating. This is a very important role that brings all these teams together. If you're an enterprise, you know how hard it is to work across the various different teams. So assigning someone to do that can bring the cyber threat intel, can get the red team to play nicely with the blue team, especially when there's a history of adversarial behavior there, you want them to work together, right? We're all on the same team. And then, of course, we had internal operations in this case, who were Urban as the sponsor. We had various people in the organization there helping us prepare, spectating, and remediating. And we have awesome examples we're going to share with you here. So for attack tools, our main attack tool here was Scythe. Now, we do work, and I'm actually surprised it's probably the first presentation where we don't mention the C2 matrix, but we do have a number of different command and control frameworks that you can use. In this case, we use Scythe, and I don't want to make this a vendor pitch at all, but the reason we use that is because it's an enterprise-grade tool that allows us to repeat the same adversary behavior consistently over and over so that we can improve our detection, make sure the technology is working, and then work and improve our people and our process. So we set up 2 servers, actually, one out in a cloud environment. We use Google Cloud in this instance, but you can use any cloud environment. That's for testing mostly command and control channels. And then we also had an internal instance that we used primarily for testing some of the other TTPs. So you'll see that as we go through. Then from the defensive perspective, we needed some systems in the production environment. We would VPN in just like any organization has nowadays, right? With your multi-factor authentication, all that fun stuff. And we had a jump point. That was a production system. We didn't do much testing on that. We got 2 other endpoint systems running Windows 10, same configuration, same security tools as all the other production systems. And of course, a server. And why a server if we had endpoints? Well, because in this particular organization, the policies on a server are different than a policy on an endpoint. You will probably see that in larger organizations as you go. It's probably the best practice. Then we got Active Directory accounts, just like a new user would. Enabled email access, enabled internet access, and made sure that the entire stack was there, right? The standard antivirus, the firewalls, the SIM and the logging, the email security, which, by the way, was awesome. Shout out to Urban and all the work that they've done on that. Again, we were not focused on testing that. We did a little testing because, when someone tells you that their security is really good, you kind of want to poke at it. But we were doing mostly assume breach. And all these systems were set up like that. And big shout out to Event Sentry. I'm going to talk about them quite a bit here because that's where all the logic exists. So we're going to go through week by week just so you have an idea of how this went. You can do these exercises in a day. You can do these exercises in 1 week. At the Purple Team Summit, Ben from Kimberly Clark is doing a talk on doing a 1 hour exercise. So you can do these different methods. We did it over a 6-week period. On the first week, we wanted to baseline. We wanted to learn and make sure we had access to what we needed and do some basic TTPs. So for the start, we created a basic synthetic piece of malware with Scythe, was a binary and a DLL. We did user execution, which is very common, probably the main way that most people get in nowadays, right? They phish and a user clicks on something. We also did run DLL32 and established a command and control over HTTPS being the most common communication protocol we see used by adversaries. And then we simply ran Who Am I? Very, very basic. But we used this week to make sure we had all the visibility we needed. We made sure we had access to the systems we needed. We had admin on one server so we can modify that one, and that would be tweaked and improved upon. Make sure we had access to the SIM, to all the consoles, to create alerts, to create rules, etc. And what happened the first week? This was a little planning document I mentioned. We want to show a plan. This is the plan, not just say, hey, we're going to go and do stuff, right? In this case, we can actually extract the plans from Scythe into Vector. So this is a screenshot for Vector. Vector is a free tool that we use to provide value and show value on Purple Team engagements. And this was the result. Lots of red, 0% detection. There was no detection for Who Am I, for the command and control, for the user execution, for the run DLL, or for the command line. So all TTPs in this case were not detected. And of course, we did establish the command and control. So to put that in a different format here, here's a nice little pie chart. That does not look too good, right? 100% not detected rate. We had work to do. So the first thing we wanted to implement was Sysmon. This was a mostly Windows environment. They already had some Windows event logs. They had the functionality to import those Windows event logs into their SIM, which is Event Sentry. So we started on our system by enabling Sysmon. Sysmon is System Monitor. If you've never heard of it, it is awesome. It's free. It's from SysInternals, from Microsoft. It's signed. And it's a Windows service and really a device driver that runs on each system. You then enable different configurations to be able to determine and log things like a new process starting, or a network connection, or a registry was edited, or a new file was created. In particular here, we wanted to get the low-hanging fruit. And so we enabled Sysmon Event ID 1, which is process creation. We created rules for run DLL32, command.exe, and whoami.exe. And then we sent those logs to the SIM, and we created some alerts to say if anyone ran this, then log and alert. In this case, we set up some email alerts. And of course, we had to tune, but we'll get to that shortly. This is what Sysmon event looks like. In this case, we ran Who Am I? And Who Am I can be run by any user at any given time. But if you know your environment and you know who runs Who Am I, you can tune this to only alert when people that generally wouldn't run Who Am I, right? So for instance, Urban or Chad or anyone in this organization that is a sysadmin that does run this, let's not alert on them. Let's only alert when someone else does. And that was all done through Event Sentry. And big shout out to them. Again, don't want to get into too much marketing or product, but Event Sentry was what they used. This was not something we chose, and we learned about it. We learned that they're a hybrid SIEM that has native Active Directory and NetFlow monitoring. It also has native integration of Sysmon. So we got a little lucky, yes, because they were using this tool. We didn't have to spend that much time creating the integration itself, but focus on the tuning of the various alerts. You can feed alerts to any system, but the tuning is really where the focus needs to be. So shout out to Event Sentry, and their engineers also work closely with us with some of the more sophisticated TTPs that didn't have built-in rules. And of course, we're going to share those with the community. So in this case, we created an alert. This just a basic example of an email alert that would go out when a particular trigger occurred. So after the first week, after our baseline, we had a lot more detection. We were logging things locally. We were sending them to a central repository. There was some logic occurring, some rules that would say alert, send an email alert if any of these users that are not admins run it. And there is still parts that aren't detected, right? We aren't going to get to 100% pretty much ever. So what did that look like? 80% detection. If this occurred, there is much higher chance of the team being able to catch it. So that was our first week. Our second week, we started with a low sophistication Chinese threat group known as APT-19. And the goals here are to introduce new TTPs over time. As we go through, there are going to be repeated TTPs, right? A lot of threat actors use application layer protocols for a command and control. A lot of them do user execution. So we went through, and again, here's our plan. Nice little plan at the beginning of the week. Talk about with the blue team, this is what we're going to do. Lots of living off the land, lots of discovery. That's generally what happens once an adversary gets on your system. And we had 0% detection again. Again, this is going back to our original baseline, to how we found the systems the day we arrived. So we had to implement more controls now. Lots of living off the land for discovery, like ipconfig, netstat, netviews, netshares, directories, find, locate, etc. We can enable all these with System Event ID 1. I've talked about this already. But then again, tune it to only alert when the people that normally don't do this are doing it. And then we also enabled some command and control activities. Sysmon Event ID 3 for network connections, and Event ID 11 for file creation when new files are created. Again, had to tune those. And here's when we started talking about PowerShell. So PowerShell can be detected with Sysmon Event ID 1. And our question was, do you use PowerShell in your environment? To which they replied on Monday, we do not use PowerShell.exe. Definitely turn on that alert. We want to know when that happens. And we hear this all the time. So what did we do? We turned on the alerts, and what happened? Hundreds of alerts on the first day, because indeed they do use PowerShell, but they had no visibility. So now we tuned it. We saw in particular, this was case. I'm sure you all have some sort of PowerShell in your environment. And then we had to tune that to only alert whenever it wasn't an actual internal product that is allowed. So what does this look like? Very, very simple. We just loaded up our Scythe payload, loaded PowerShell, and ran PowerShell Who Am I? And PowerShell with execution bypass and encoding. And then we shut it down. So every time you double click this executable, it would do exactly the same thing. And did we do that a lot? Here you can see an example. From the time of, no, we don't have PowerShell, to enabling it locally, sending it to their SIM, and then tuning it, we ran it 8 different times. And this is why it's important to be able to emulate the same thing over and over as you tune for these particular rules. So at the end of week 2, we're looking a lot better. We have about 73% detection. Still some things we're not going to detect. And of course, everyone has a good understanding of why that is the case. No one is expecting 100% at this point. So week 3, let's go a little more sophisticated. This time we chose a Russian threat group that used a number of different C2 channels. They used things like DNS and RDP and had the probability of attacking our customer. So in this case, another plan. Let's do some command and control through DNS, through HTTPS, and through RDP. Of course, they still do some discovery, so you got to do discovery again. And then they did some collection, things like key logging and taking print screens and stealing from the clipboard. So the command and control channels, HTTP and HTTPS are the most common ones we see based on cyber threat intelligence, but adversaries also use other types. They use things like DNS for long haul to be a little more stealthy. They also use remote desktop protocol, something we see all the time. And then we also have a module, which is part of our marketplace, called Let Me Out of Your Net. This was created by Mubix, and it's a free Python script if you want to check it out. And that tests for multiple egress ports. So a part of actually establishing C2 with these protocols, we can actually test for everything outbound. And here is where we had our first win, which was that the DNS modules were blocked outbound, which was great to see. We document that, right? We don't just document wins for the red team. We document everything, wins for everyone. So in this case, 91% was not detected. And back we go to implementing controls. One of the main things we found is that they allowed remote desktop outbound. Immediately, the spectator said, no, that's wrong. That can't be correct. We said, well, let's test it. We tested it, and indeed it was. They were able to fix this in minutes. Also, another big win. Then back to actually testing what we're looking for. Network connections, looking for known threat and known bad IP addresses from cyber threat intelligence. You remember the pyramid of pain. We can add those IPs. We can add those domains to catch the low-hanging fruit and then focus on the harder things, like the Windows API calls for screen prints, key logging, and clipboard. Right around this time, Sysmon got updated. So we didn't have too much time to test it, but there is now detection for clipboard modification on Sysmon. So even with that, we were up at 60% detection, 1 blocked from the get-go, and 33% not detected. Week 4, APT33, an Iranian threat group. They are about medium sophistication if I had to pick them out, but a lot of organizations started thinking about this after the January assassination of Soleimani. And in this particular case, they went after supply chain attacks. And what does our customer do? Lots of supply chain, lots of logistics. So we wanted to test this one. And here was our plan. Here's the threat profile. And again, a nice little graphic from Vector as to what's there. As you can see, more TTPs, more chances to get caught, also more things to test. So in this case, we had another win. They detected and got alerts that scheduled tasks were being created. A scheduled task is a method to gain persistence. Most operating systems have the ability to do this. Linux has cron jobs. Windows has the scheduled task service. It's generally running. We use that for a variety of different legit things. So just seeing scheduled tasks running is not that bad. Seeing a new one get added, that you want an alert. And in that case, again, testing and tuning, testing and tuning. So event ID 1, process create, again, modify that, and then look into file creation. A dropper file, when you run a scheduled task, you have to drop something onto disk. So file creation, and then registry modifications. Because scheduled task isn't the only way to do persistence. You can do that through the registry, through run keys. So we looked deeper into persistence on week 4 and tuned those as well to detect that. And if you do start looking at registry, you're going to see pretty much anything touches the registry. So the tuning is going to be very, very important here to only alert on certain creations, certain key names, certain values. So a little deeper into registry keys, event ID 12, 13, and 14 will enable the modification of them through either an object creation or deletion, a value being set, or a key being set or renamed. So this got very, very noisy. We had to test this quite a bit and really focus on startup activities, so certain locations where the registry writes to that are run once exe. And you can do those not only for the local system, but also for the current user. A lot of people think that persistence requires admin privileges. It doesn't. We can persist on when a particular user logs in, which means you need to look at every user's key as well as the overall one for that system. So after week 4, we're up at 58% detection. We've added a few more and some things we still could not detect related to API calls. Week 5, APT3. Everyone's heard of this one, right? This was a big plan that MITRE ATT&CK came out with. I believe they also did an attack evaluation for it. So we wanted to try a more sophisticated Chinese actor. So again, created our plan. And in this case, we wanted to test exfiltration. So as you saw, as we started with the baseline, we went more and more and more into the steps and the tactics done by adversaries, from discovery to then collections to execution and now exfiltration. So after that, again, our baseline 0% detection, we want to take a deeper look. So looked at other API calls, see what we can do with screen prints, key logging, clipboarding. Very difficult to detect because everyone takes screenshots. Everyone takes key logs, right? Or everyone does clipboard. So we looked into exfiltration, things like creating remote threads, file creations, and outbound network activity, all with Sysmon event ID 8, 11, and 3, respectively. At the end of that week, we were up to 71% detection, which was great. So week 6 came along. And week 6, we always like to leave a little area for free play. Now, free play, like Bryson said, isn't just about going all crazy and seeing what random things we can find. Let's focus on what we've learned. We've been working together for 5 weeks. What are the areas that we haven't touched on that might be areas that we want to focus on? Well, this was right around the time that zero login came out. New vulnerability was being exploited, I think, within 4 weeks. There was also a Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, which they believed to have very good email security, so we wanted to test that. And then domain discovery and lateral movement within the domain. So shout out to the folks that created Bloodhound. This was one of the first things we ran. Bloodhound allows you to gain information about the domain. It does a series of requests with a tool called SharpHound to the domain controller, all through legit LDAP queries. All you need is a valid user in the environment, which we had. And then you can also query all the individual systems. And there was no detection for this. So the detection for this actually had to be on the domain controller, something we did not have access to, but because of what we had, the integration of Events Entry, they were able to turn that on as we worked together and show them what was possible. We also found that there was an excessive number of users in their enterprise admin group. We notified them immediately, and they identified this as a complete mix-up. How did that happen? We need to remove that. And they removed it within minutes. It was great because by now, week 6, they know what we're doing. They're following us. They have trust in us. We have trust in them. Simple phone call was resolved in minutes. Was great to see. A quick remediation. Then we looked at Microsoft Exchange in the Windows domain. Sure, we weren't really there doing pen testing, but when you're at a client and a new vulnerability is being exploited, US CERT is giving out warnings, you have to do your due diligence and test it. So we looked at these 2 vulnerabilities and we were not able to exploit them because the systems were not vulnerable. In the 6-week period, we actually observed and saw that their patch management policy was being followed, and they were indeed patching their systems at the rate that they had said they were, which was great to see. So we had to move on. We then tried doing lateral movement. This is another area where they focused on quite a bit. They have endpoints, they have servers, they have another location, and there is where they had a lot of controls around network segmentation. And indeed, that network segmentation did prove to be correct. We tried some other tools. We tried Scythe. We did some Empire, PSXSec, PowerShell, etc., just to validate that, not with a single tool. Then we tried some Kerberos roasting. I'm sure you've all heard of Kerberos roasting, right? Tim Medine of Red Seed, shout out to you, sir. This is one of those TTPs in MITRE ATT&CK, and it takes advantage of how Kerberos authentication works. A user authenticates with a domain controller, grabs what's called a ticket granting ticket. They then can ask for a ticket for a service. That service doesn't even have to exist anymore. And that service ticket is given to you by the domain controller. So you don't ever have to interact with the service. you grab these tickets, you take them offline, you crack them with Hashcat, and you try to log in with them. So lots of talk on Kerberos roasting, definitely something you should look at. And indeed, we did find an account. Ironically, it was an account tied to one of their security solutions. This has been resolved, but we won't name the name of it. But I'm sure you all see that all the time. And then we did some other things, low-hanging fruit sort of stuff, like port scanning, running Nmap and whatnot. This one, because it was free play, we weren't doing it live, and Urban texted me, "Hey, I see what you're doing," and showed me a picture of the alert, which was always pretty cool. Now, we're all playing together nicely, bringing value, and saying when things worked and when things didn't work. And this was the case for this one as well. Lastly, we did some exfiltration testing. They did not have the event sentry module for NetFlow, which was a recommendation, but again, we did not enable this because that module costs a little more money. However, with all the work that we've done, I think now they are in a position where it would make sense to start monitoring things like NetFlow because they have the detection built into the endpoints. So the end state, as I mentioned earlier, was $0 in technology, and we achieved a 64% detection rate on the unique TTPs, right? So many of these TTPs, you saw some of them were repeated. We're not counting those. We're counting unique ones. Does this cover all of MITRE ATT&CK? No, it does not, right? We're not playing attack bingo. We are emulating the TTPs that made sense for this particular customer and creating detections for those. And based on our testing, we now believe that they have the controls in place, the alerts in place, and the people trained to follow a process to respond to an actual attacker. So last slide here.
Sorry, if I could interject back on that last slide. Think of the percentages not as 100% is the number to achieve, but understanding the benchmark of your own performance from where you were and being able to grow that. So it's a relative performance of what you've achieved, what you want to achieve from that, and what that means. Not, I've checked all the boxes, I've got 100%, I'm 100% secure.
Exactly. Yep. And as far as trending, we did the 5 weeks here, again, using Vector. This is a screenshot from Vector. Every week we would go back to our baseline, right, which had 0%, or you saw the various numbers. Towards the end, number of test cases done, we were at a much higher percentage. So recommendations at the end of this: continue testing to make sure your controls don't get modified. We found 2 instances of that in the 6 weeks, right? RDP enabled outbound, which shouldn't have been, and too many people in a particular group. The same is going to happen now that we've tuned their processes. There might be a case where a new solution's added. There might be a tweak or something that stopped the controls from working. So continually testing for these is recommended. The NetFlow data will definitely help later on in the kill chain for the command and control and exfiltration. And then continue to increase the sophistication levels. Here on the right, you have a screenshot of our public library of adversary emulation plans. Whenever something new comes out, we look into it. The screenshot's actually already old. There's Rook that we've looked into recently. There's a number of other adversaries that we've looked at, and we share this. So even if you don't have our tool, you can go through and see what the plan looks like. We also provide attack navigator layers. So if you use MITRE ATT&CK, you can just load that up. And at least we've done the work of creating the plan for you. Now you just need to execute it. And sharing with the community, as I mentioned, we like giving back. We would like seeing the industry improve. So we've made the Purple Team exercise framework. That's exactly what we followed here. Available on site.io/PTEF. The adversary emulation plans are free, and it is the largest public library currently available that we know of. The Sysmon configurations are also free. Shout out to Olaf Hartong. He works at Falcon Force. He's a detection engineer, and he has Sysmon Modular, which is a great baseline to start from and gives you the tools to modify your Sysmon based on your organization. And then lastly, all the alerts and the logic that we created is being shared through Event Sentry. So if anyone uses Event Sentry or you're looking into a SIM, you can check those out. we've created all these rules for our customer, for our client, and giving them back to the community through them as well. So that's it. Thank you.